those days.
Oh, I know that. I know in my family there's talk of my grandmother talked about her aunt, which would be what, my great aunt? Is that how that would that
Your grandmother's aunt?
that they never could figure out what was wrong with her, and years later the family was just sitting around talking like, yeah, we figure I don't remember what her name was, but Aunt whoever probably had TB, and they just never figured it out in time. Because TB was a terrible. It was another essentially pandemic of its own.
Oh
Yeah.
Rampant through the population.
Very serious stuff, and they you know, I mean, the civil rights weren't quite what they were in those days as they are today. So you got that. It was no problem at all for them to grab you and just stuff you in an asylum or an institution somewhere. Yeah.
So help me out here, Joe, because my memory is failing me at the moment. Do you remember what exactly does tuberculosis do to you? Do you remember?
Tuberculosis basically attacks your lungs, and it is a very deadly disease. It's actually got, in most people it stays kind of latent, but among people that it severely affects, it kills about half of them.
Ugh.
Yeah. So it's like, let me put that, most infections are what they call asymptomatic and latent, but about 1 in 10 latent infections eventually progresses to an active disease, which, if left untreated, kills more than 50% of the infected people.
So it's in the lungs. So it is a lung disease.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, they back in the day they used to use cigarettes, of all things, to actually inhibit it. It's kind of like the chemotherapy of its day.
What?
I saw it actually an old photograph of people that were in some asylum in California. They were all smoking, because that was one of the prescribed things. They would prescribe people like Lucky Strikes.
Light up the lucky.
It's light up time.
Be happy, so lucky.
It's light up time.
For the taste that you like, light up the Lucky Strike.
Relax.
It's light up time.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
God.
Yeah, they would actually make all their patients smoke cigarettes because apparently that inhibited the growth of the bacteria.
Oh, wow. Geez. Well, hey, the marvel of modern medicine.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a good reason. It's because if tobacco is inhibiting the growth of tuberculosis bacteria, it's probably inhibiting other bacterial growth in your lungs too.
Sure.
So obviously tobacco is a good thing.
Well, you know what? Everybody that got influenza then should have just smoked Lucky Strikes and called it good.
Just the bold, smooth taste of it. So tuberculosis is just an infection of the lungs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a serious,
Obviously,
bad thing, but
Right.
Yeah, it's I could see where, you know, something like this, if you're, say, infected with a virus or two viruses, as in your previous theory, and it might, and tuberculosis was much more rampant back in 1918 than it is today.
True.
It might open the door for some sort of tuberculosis infection, which could be the actual killer.
So this theory is that it's just bad luck?
Yeah, well, obviously.
Basically?
well, they've got a little bit of tuberculosis in there, but not enough that their body can't fight it off, is what it sounds like.
Well, you know,
And then the influenza hits,
Yeah.
and your body's trying to, again, just like, you know, the double virus, you're trying to fight both at once, and then they just hit you all at once. They tag team.
Yeah, like I was just saying, most tuberculosis is what they call latent, asymptomatic, but then say these things come along and boom, you know, it's unleashed. The beast is unleashed.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean that's entirely possible if that's what happened. But that's good news for us in our present day because we haven't completely stamped out TB.
No, it does pop up now and again.
We're pretty good at it.
Yeah, it's a lot less prevalent. I would say that it's entirely possible that there were millions of people, in fact, probable millions of people were walking around with latent cases of TB back in 1918.
True.
That's probably not happening today.
Probably not. The
That's
TV
true.
police got him.
Yeah.
Use the TV police.
Yeah. Poor TB. So persecuted. Anyway, so much for that theory.
So I guess my favorite theory.
Yeah, so I know you've been frothing at the book.
I'm so excited.
Because
about
it really is, where did this come from?
So, I mean, that is right. It's the interesting thing is a big old mutation of a fairly normal virus.
Yeah.
Right? And so the big question is, where did this come from? And my favorite theory is space.
The final frontier.
The final frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's this really great theory that basically says that every big epidemic that we've ever had as a human race has been followed very closely a comet.
Oh, I saw. Okay, you got to break this down for me because
Okay.
I tried to do a little bit on this, but I got lost.
Well, I got stuck. So we got opposites because you got stuck in science or something. I don't know what happened. But so there's a really interesting pattern of human pandemics in the last, like thousands and millions of years. It's a really interesting pattern that we follow. So the first one that I could find record of was the Great Plague of Athens, which was in 430 BC.
All right.
It was localized, and it could have had a local source, but that was never discovered. And right before that, we passed through a comet's trail as Earth. Earth passed through a comet's trail.
Okay.
So like within a year of that pandemic happening. Okay, the next one was in the 1st century AD. And a Greek physician was referring to an outbreak in Libya, Egypt, and Syria. It was most likely the bubonic plague, let's be fair, which is, spread by fleas and rodents. But right before then, again, we had passed through a comet's trail within the last 2 years, I think it was. Half a millennia later, in 541 AD, they called it a scourge at that point. It was, again, the bubonic plague. They kept reoccurring, but it was different strands and more horrible strands every single time. In Constantinople, and they're all bacterial diseases that are spread by that it was just like it went away and then came back and went away and came back.
True. Yeah.
It wasn't
'Cause
just like
fleas don't live
dormant
that
in
long,
fleas.
So, yeah.
Just, suddenly the fleas weren't biting anymore, and then 300 years later, they started biting again.
I would like it if fleas would stop biting for 300 years.
That would be
it would
pretty
make
great.
my life so much better because they always go for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stop like right now and pop up again like long after my death. That's cool. Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, so the bubonic plague is resistant to freezing,
Okay.
which is pretty interesting. It's also radiation resistant, which is also pretty interesting. So what does that mean for us? It means that the best place for it to incubate is space or the upper atmosphere. So the theory is that I guess there are two theories. I think we spoke a little bit about this. I know you got to do just a tiny bit of research on it. I understood it that the bacteria and viruses live up in the upper atmosphere and they're constantly bombarded by solar radiation, which would cause all of these viruses and bacteria to mutate into weird versions of themselves. So the theory that I understood is that it's just constantly up there. So every once in a while, we pass through the tail of a comet, which causes meteor showers, which is just rocks falling from the sky into our atmosphere all the way to the ground, which brings these bacteria and viruses back down to the ground.
Okay.
So it would explain why they are the same thing, quote unquote, but they're different strands and more mutated strands of these things.
Let me just ask, just so I understand.
Sure.
Point of order here. So you're saying their air currents are keeping them in the upper atmosphere. The winds, they can't drift down because of the winds.
Yeah.
So they're just constantly swirling up there. They got this little death cloud.
Yep.
And then a meteor comes swooshing through the atmosphere and creates essentially enough turbulence and causes a tail to suck that stuff down behind it.
That's one of the theories. The other
Okay.
theory is that they become negatively charged. Because, like the Aurora Borealis, for instance, is basically negatively charged dust particles from Earth going up into the atmosphere. So the other theory is that maybe these are the viruses and bacteria are becoming negatively charged. I'm going to be honest, I don't totally understand that theory.
So
mostly
that
because
then
I'm a scientist.
lets
So
them
they
attract down.
they
or-
just chill out in the air, and then something coming through there again positively charges them and allows them to come back through. But the thing that's really
It could be
interesting,
that they would eventually just settle out through sheer gravity too. I mean,
Sure.
they do have some mass. So
the thing that's really interesting with this, I think, is that in a lot of plagues that we've had as a civilization, people talk about them being spread through flying animals of some kind.
Yeah. The
So
bird
through
flu.
birds, through birds, or through fleas,
or pigs.
pigs who fly.
Yeah.
So, that's a really interesting facet to this theory, is that things that are closer up in the higher atmosphere get it first and spread it to humans.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Because I know that what was it, the bird flu of 2009 or something, and it was blamed on waterfowl, then spreading the infection to chickens in China, who then then ran rampant through them until they were all destroyed, and only a few people got it. But okay,
Yeah.
okay, I can run with that.
So the way that this kind of ties back into what we're talking about, right? Because we don't want to just talk like amorphously about bacteria and viruses live in the sky. That's a scary thought, right?
And they could just drop down any old time.
They just drop down whenever. So the idea is a combination of one of the theories I was talking about earlier, is that it's a combination of two viruses, but it's different in that the idea is that it was a new viral strain that transferred its genes to an old viral strain, which already existed within the human genome or whatever, and created a really deadly hybrid. Because the thing that you think about with viruses and bacteria is that its point is to not kill you. The perfect virus, you won't even be affected by at all. So every virus that makes you sick is a mutation of some kind. Because it wants to keep you alive. Because if you die, it dies, right?
Right.
So it was this theory that there was a new viral strain that had been horribly mutated up in the atmosphere and came down and basically mixed with one that was down here already. Which is a pretty interesting theory.
It's a little. I'm going to say it seems a little far-fetched, but okay.
Sure.
A little bit. But yeah. Anyway.
Is there more to this? This goes on. I'm judging by the tome that you're flipping through that this theory gets deeper and deeper and more twisted.
So in 1910, do you know what happened in 1910?
Yeah, Halley's Comet.
Halley's Comet.
Yeah.
That's the thing they talk about, is that it took 7 years for the Spanish flu to come through then. So that was the original theory people were talking about. Oh, it was Halley's Comet, blah, blah, blah. So there's no really great causation between that because of the 7 years part, right? But there was this comet called Comet Encke that had extremely close approaches to Earth, both in 1908 and then again in 1914. And we passed through its tail in 1918.
Okay, so we went through its tail 3 times in 10 years. Ooh.
Yeah.
I didn't think we hit comets that frequently.
Well, so what happens with comets, right, is they get stuck in our orbit for a little while.
What happens is that if the orbit of the comet is in the ecliptic, and you know what the ecliptic is? Okay, the ecliptic is the plane of when the sun formed. It basically accreted as a disk. It compressed down and it turned into a spinning disk, and then eventually compresses left behind out there in this disk in the outer fringes, which consolidated itself further into planets.
Okay, so it's when you see the map of the planets, it looks like a series of frisbees around the sun.
Yeah,
It's a simple
exactly.
version. Yeah.
We're more or less, the planets are more or less in the same plane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got that.
And so the actual plane formed by the Earth's orbit is what's called the ecliptic.
Okay.
And so the ecliptic. So if a comet happens to be in more or less in the ecliptic, in other words, if it comes in, crosses orbit, goes around the sun, goes back out, crossing orbit again, that plane of its orbit is the same as the plane of our orbit, then we will cross that path every year.
Multiple times.
Yeah, many
Okay,
times.
okay.
Yeah, and that's what meteor showers. That's why we can predict meteor showers, because we know there's a bunch of cosmic crap out there in our orbital path that we're going to cross through every year, because those are the remains of a comet. Comet's tail.
I always wondered how that worked. Okay, that totally makes sense. All right, continue on.
Yeah.
Joe is the comet expert.
Joe is the
I am
comet
not the-
expert.
I am
It's
not
good.
the
Our
comet
powers
expert.
combined, we will be able to explain this thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things they talked about a lot when I was doing this research was that the way that the Spanish flu spread was really weird. We've spent a lot of time talking this episode about that. There were some islands in the mid-Atlantic that definitely escaped, as you were saying. But my research brought up that they didn't close the borders and that there was shipping that happened in between those places.
To some of them, yeah.
To some of them.
You would kinda
But they
have
were
to have some of that, huh?
There was shipping that happened, but they still remained death and flu free. So that, I think, was very interesting.
No, they might have
And-
just observed good quarantine procedures too. You never know.
That's certainly true. And, again, this is all it's conjecture, basically.
Yeah, there's been so many rehashes of this. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Then there was as I said before, the weird delay of it hitting Australia. And one of the things they talked about is that when you analyze the upper atmospheric patterns of 1918, the flu very closely followed that pattern. So where the places that people were hit really hard were places that the upper atmosphere was more densely happening. Does that make sense?
No, not at all. More densely happening.
More densely happening.
Yeah.
So it's like weather patterns. You have the low atmospheric weather patterns, and you have your high atmospheric weather
So there was
patterns.
they had more high atmosphere
weather stuff happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's
in
more
these
activity.
areas. So it was basically just like falling from the sky along the jet stream.
Okay.
So that's very interesting as well.
All right. So that's credence.
So the pattern that it followed was not just the way that a disease goes through the air, an airborne disease goes,
Which is person to
just
person.
person to person. It didn't follow precisely that pattern. It more accurately followed the jet stream and upper atmospheric weather patterns,
Okay.
which is very interesting as well, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought. I don't remember seeing that anywhere. So that's okay.
So the other thing that was really interesting is that in 2007, this comet was struck by a massive material from our sun. It was back in our solar system again.
Oh, so this is Anki again?
Yes. Was struck by a little bit of our sun,
What, like a solar
Solar
flare?
flare.
a little solar flare, and it broke off some of the comet's tail, and we went through it again. In early June, or early July, late June of
broke-
2007. And so, do you remember what happened in 2007?
Let's see. I was working at the grocery store.
I was
Well, so
drinking.
the
No,
good
I
news
don't-
is you're not forgetting. The good news is you're not forgetting anything. But in 2009, what happened?
There was another outbreak
was-
of H1N1.
That was avian flu.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Bird
okay.
flu, yeah.
I think it's really interesting that every time we pass through this thing, there's definitely an incubation period. But we pass through this tail and we get a new virus. We get a new pandemic. Swine flu we passed through in 2009 again. When
All right.
swine flu happened.
We're so screwed.
Devil's advocate time.
Sure.
I need to understand. So, okay. This theory is postulating that there is biological material in the tail of a comet. So my question is, how does that live? Because everything I understand is that things don't live in space.
Well, they are unaffected by freezing.
Oh,
I thought I said that. I may have not
no,
already
you talked
said
about that in the bubonic
They're-
plague, but I didn't carry that over.
So N1H1 is also, or H1N1 is also resistant to freezing and resistant to radiation.
Oh,
Yeah, the
so
little
it's something
buggers
that's
are
trapped in
hardy.
the ice particles that make up the comet. Okay.
That seems to be the theory. So then my understanding of it is that these are viruses that just kind of chill in our upper atmosphere, but there also seems to be a theory that they are, in fact, held within these comets, which is also really an interesting theory. You know, I got really sucked up into that theory. I've got a lot of information on it. And, you know, just plagues of all of the past. But, you know, I thought that was kind of an interesting theory that had some good evidence, you know, whether or not I necessarily believe that it's totally accurate.
Okay, so this brings up a good question.